Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that flips our usual understanding of history on its head. We often celebrate great victories, the moments that forged empires and defined nations. But what if I told you that one of the most important events in the history of a civilization wasn't a victory, but a catastrophic defeat? A battle so devastating it forced an entire people to rethink who they were and, in doing so, ensured their survival for millennia. This is the story of how the destruction of the kingdom of Judah and its temple in 586 BCE didn't end a people, but instead saved them. Let's set the stage. The year is 586 BCE. The ancient Near East is a chessboard of powerful empires, and the small kingdom of Judah is a pawn caught in the middle. For centuries, the people of Judah, the Israelites, had a clear understanding of their world. Their God, Yahweh, was the supreme deity, and his home on earth was the magnificent Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. Their covenant was simple. As long as they worshipped Yahweh and followed his laws, he would protect them and their kingdom. The temple wasn't just a building, it was the physical anchor of their faith, the symbol of God's presence and protection. The king, a descendant of the great King David, was God's chosen ruler. Everything, their identity, their security, their faith was tied to this specific land, this specific city, and this specific building. But this world was about to be shattered. The mighty Neo-Babylonian Empire, under the ruthless king Nebuchadnezzar II, had its sights set on regional domination. After a series of rebellions and political miscalculations by Judah's kings, Nebuchadnezzar's patience ran out. His massive army marched on Jerusalem, and after a brutal siege that left the city starving and desperate, the walls were breached. The result was absolute devastation. The city was plundered and burned. The sacred Temple of Solomon, the heart of their faith for 400 years, was torn down, stone by stone. The king was captured, his sons executed before his eyes, and he was then blinded and dragged away in chains. The elite of Judah, the priests, the scribes, the artisans, the leaders were rounded up and forced into a long, humiliating march into exile in Babylon. From our modern perspective, this should have been the end of the story. This is what happened to countless other ancient peoples. When your capital city is destroyed, your holy sites desecrated, your king captured, and your leadership class deported, your unique cultural and religious identity usually dissolves. You assimilate into the dominant culture of your conquerors, and within a few generations, your language, your gods, and your traditions are just a distant memory, footnotes in the history of a more powerful empire. The Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, Judah's neighbors, all faced similar fates and eventually vanished from history. By all historical logic, the Israelites should have been next. But they weren't. So, what happened? Why did this one group survive when so many others didn't? The answer lies in how they processed this unparalleled catastrophe. Trapped in exile, hundreds of miles from their ruined homeland, the intellectual and spiritual leaders of Judah faced a profound crisis of faith. Their old worldview was in ruins. If God was all-powerful, how could he let his own temple be destroyed? If they were his chosen people, why were they now captives in a foreign land, ruled by a king who worshipped other gods? Was their God weaker than the gods of Babylon, or had he abandoned them? These were the questions that haunted them in the waters of Babylon. Facing these soul-crushing questions, they had two choices. They could abandon their faith, accept that the Babylonian gods were stronger, and assimilate. This was the easy path, the path of historical oblivion. Or they could find a new way to understand their God and their relationship with him. They chose the latter, and in doing so, they engineered one of the most radical and enduring theological revolutions in human history. They didn't conclude that their God was weak. They concluded that he was more powerful than they had ever imagined. This wasn't a defeat for God, it was God's judgment ** on them **. They hadn't kept their side of the covenant. Their kings had been corrupt, and the people had strayed, worshipping other idols. The prophets, like Jeremiah, who had warned of this exact disaster, were now seen as having been right all along. This was a radical shift. God was no longer just a local deity tied to a specific temple or piece of land. He was a universal God, a God of justice whose power and moral law extended over all nations, even the mighty Babylonian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't a conqueror who had defeated God. He was an instrument, a servant in God's grand plan to chastise and purify his people. This reinterpretation meant that their connection to God was not severed when the temple fell. In fact, it was now more direct and personal than ever. With the physical center of their religion gone, the exiles had to create new ways to maintain their identity and practice their faith. They couldn't offer sacrifices at the temple, so what could they do? They turned to the things they could carry with them, their sacred stories, their laws, and their traditions. The focus shifted from ritual sacrifice at a central place to prayer, study, and adherence to a moral and ritual code wherever they might be. This was the birth of synagogue-based worship. Community gatherings replaced the grand temple ceremonies. The study of Scripture, the Torah, became the central act of religious devotion. Priests, whose role was tied to the temple, lost influence, while scribes and sages, the scholars, who could read, interpret, and teach the sacred texts, rose in prominence. Think about how revolutionary this is. They essentially portabilized their religion. Their faith no longer depended on a king, a temple, or even a country. It now lived inside a text and a community. This was the genius that allowed them to survive. The scrolls became their new temple, the community their new altar. They meticulously collected, edited, and canonized their sacred writings, the stories of creation, the laws of Moses, the songs of David, the warnings of the prophets. This compilation effort, driven by the urgency of exile, would eventually become the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians call the Old Testament, one of the most influential books in human history. It became their portable homeland, a constitution for a nation in exile. By defining themselves by a shared text and a shared way of life observing the Sabbath, dietary laws, and circumcision, they built a cultural wall around their community that prevented assimilation. They could live in Babylon or Persia or Rome, but they would not become Babylonians, Persians, or Romans. Their identity was now ideological, not geographical. This transformation from a national cult centered on a temple to a religion of the book is the key to Jewish survival. It created a resilient, adaptable form of identity that could withstand the loss of sovereignty, homeland, and political power. And then, something remarkable happened. In 539 BCE, the Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon. In a stunning reversal of fortune, Cyrus issued a decree allowing the exiled peoples, including the Judeans, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. A portion of the exiles did return to Jerusalem and, over time, constructed the Second Temple. But the revolution that had occurred in Babylon was irreversible. The old ways of thinking were gone forever. Even with a new temple, the synagogue, the Bible, and the decentralized, text-based faith remained central to their identity. This new form of Judaism, forged in the fires of defeat and exile, was now strong enough to survive future catastrophes. And those catastrophes did come. When the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE, it was another devastating blow. But this time, it wasn't an existential crisis. The groundwork had already been laid 600 years earlier. They had already learned how to be a people without a temple, without a state. The religion of the book, which we now call Judaism, was able to endure the long diaspora, spreading across the globe while maintaining a cohesive identity. This very model of a diaspora religion, a faith that can thrive without a political or geographical center, would later influence the development of both Christianity and Islam, which also spread far beyond their places of origin. So, when we look back at that terrible moment in 586 BCE, we see a paradox. The absolute destruction of the kingdom of Judah was, in a very real sense, the beginning of the Jewish people as we know them today. The defeat that should have erased them from history is precisely what saved them. It forced them to innovate, to transform their beliefs from a localized cult into a universal, portable faith that could survive any disaster. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most creative, resilient, and enduring ideas are born not from victory and comfort, but from crisis and profound loss. It shows that true strength isn't just about winning battles, but about having the resilience to redefine who you are in the face of defeat. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into history. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Let me know in the comments what other historical paradoxes you'd like to explore. Until next time, stay curious.